I think hunting, you harvest. That was more or less murder on the little one. The big one just is what it is.
From a dusty Sierra backroad to a meadow shrouded in mystery, this is how a casual hunting trip unraveled into one of the most controversial Bigfoot encounters ever told. Chapter 1. The Sighting. A bead of dust glinted on the truck's windshield as it rumbled down the winding dirt road, the tall pines of the Sierra backcountry looming on both sides. Justin Smeja and his partner, known simply as the driver, had spent the day road hunting, a casual pastime for them whenever the season was right. On that particular evening, they decided they had reached the end of their luck and were packing it in. With the sun dipping low and the air turning crisp, they took a left turn near a meadow, expecting nothing more than a quiet ride back to camp. Yet fate had other plans. In that broad meadow, roughly 80 yards off the trail, stood a figure unlike anything they had ever seen. From the passenger seat, Justin pressed his face to the window, fully expecting a bear to lumber across the grass. Instead, he saw something standing upright, something that walked and moved more like a man than any animal he was familiar with. Everything about that moment felt wrong, as if the forest itself had paused in anticipation. In an interview recorded later, Justin recalled how he lifted his rifle in disbelief.
In the next few seconds, your partner says, "It's a man in a suit."
Yeah, so my buddy's like, "Hey, don't shoot," and I'm like, he keeps giving this order with no reason behind it.
He had shot bears before, was well accustomed to the adrenaline of the hunt, but this time, an uneasy pang tightened in his chest. Beside him, his partner was equally stunned. "Don't shoot," he kept saying. "Don't shoot." His words were urgent, but lacked explanation, until he blurted out, "It's a man in a suit." The mere suggestion only intensified the confusion. Justin stared down his scope, unsure whether he was looking at a living creature, a cruel prank, or some impossible hybrid of the two. From the earliest retellings of their story, it was clear that Justin wasn't the only skeptic involved. A filmmaker named Ro Sahibi learned of Justin's account through a blog called Bigfoot Evidence and was fascinated by the swirling rumors. Everyone seemed to have an opinion, from seasoned researchers to curious internet commenters. DNA studies were tossed about, experts whispered possibilities, and a rising tide of controversy hinted that this was bigger than a mere online rumor. His interest piqued, Ro invited Justin into his kitchen for a casual interview. 2 small cameras, 1 microphone, and a few hours' worth of conversation produced a simple clip posted online, just another piece of internet ephemera. It was never supposed to go anywhere, but it didn't stop there.
How many more seconds go by before you pull the squeeze?
Somewhere around then. I'm squeezing.
What's the last stop before you pull the trigger?
When's it going to go off? Because it felt like an eternity. It felt like time had stopped.
Instead, it snowballed. From that moment on, Justin's story ignited heated debate. Some listeners were instantly outraged, calling Justin a liar, or worse. Others were transfixed, convinced he might have stumbled onto the greatest cryptozoological discovery of modern times. Tensions soared higher when rumors circulated that Justin and the driver had, in fact, shot not 1, but 2 creatures that day in the mountains, one of them allegedly smaller, perhaps a juvenile. Critics seized on every inconsistency, pointing out red flags and poking holes in Justin's account. Skeptics demanded evidence, while believers clamored for proof that Bigfoot, an elusive legend, might finally be verified. Justin's credibility hung on one elusive element, the testimony of the driver. Critics wondered why the second man refused to speak publicly. If the driver truly saw the same thing, why hide? Was the driver's silence an admission of guilt, or was he simply unwilling to be swept into a rapidly escalating media circus? Eventually, coaxed by Ro Sahibi, the driver agreed to an interview on one condition: anonymity. He showed up wearing his work clothes, gave them 30 minutes of his time, and then planned to vanish back into his everyday life. During that brief interview, the driver's words echoed Justin's initial description. He too had stared at a figure that defied all logic, a shape that did not belong in the meadow. He freely admitted urging Justin not to shoot, fearing this might be something far stranger than a bear. While he didn't proclaim it was certainly a Bigfoot, he also couldn't dismiss the possibility.
Something crazy happened that day, absolutely, and it is what it is, and it totally could have been a Bigfoot. It could have totally not been a Bigfoot.
The experience rattled him deeply, enough to keep him away from all the drama swirling around Justin's story. He didn't want to be labeled a nutjob by his family. Yet when pressed, he refused to call the encounter a hoax. The deeper Roe dug, the more layers emerged. Recorded at the same spot where that mysterious figure had once stood, the nighttime footage captured eerie vocalizations, an animalistic clamor that nobody could fully explain. Standing by the tree line under the moonlit sky, Justin, the driver, and the film crew strained their ears, hearts pounding, as something howled in the darkness. That night, silent breaths and rapidly beating hearts replaced easy conversation, the stillness broken by distant snaps of twigs. What had they encountered in the wild heart of the Sierra? Was it a bear, a man in a costume, or something else? As the first online interview spread like wildfire, the debate only grew more heated. Whichever side you took, it was hard to deny the sheer force of interest behind Justin's tale. And so, with more eyes on him than he ever expected, Justin ventured deeper into a mystery that would challenge not only his own beliefs, but those of an entire community. From the dusty roads of the backcountry to tense interviews under the kitchen light, the puzzle was only beginning to reveal itself. In the next segment, we'll delve into the mounting controversies and the DNA studies that would either substantiate Justin's incredible story or unravel it entirely. Chapter 2. Moments of Doubt. As the dust of confusion settled on that lonely Sierra meadow, a new wave of uncertainty swept over Justin and his partner, known to us only as the driver. They had taken the initial shot at the towering figure, a shot that defied everything they had ever known about hunting. Yet the crucial question lingered. What exactly had they hit?
What did you see through your binoculars?
I don't have the greatest pair of binoculars, and I had it set up to look quite a bit further than what we had it set up to. But even looking through the binoculars, it didn't look right. It wasn't a bear. I'm not going to say what it was.
Standing by the truck, the driver raised his binoculars, heart pounding in his ears. He admits they weren't the best optics, and he had them dialed in for longer distances. But even through the slightly blurred view, it was clear this was no ordinary bear. The creature towered above the surrounding brush, at least 7.5 feet tall, maybe more. Its posture and stance mirrored a human's, arms raised and walking forward on 2 legs. The driver was alarmed. Bears in the wild don't typically stand in advance like that, not without dropping back down or turning away. This thing, instead of fleeing, seemed to be approaching them with eerie composure. Meanwhile, Justin was in his usual shooting stance. The driver, eyes glued to the binoculars, kept repeating the same desperate phrase, "Don't shoot!" But he knew Justin's habits. In their years of hunting together, Justin seldom hesitated that long. A suspect few seconds had passed, and the driver was surprised a shot hadn't already gone off. To him, that indicated Justin also sensed something unusual about the target. However, the brief hesitation soon vanished. Justin tightened on the trigger, determined not to let this bizarre opportunity pass. An ear-splitting crack tore through the air. Peering through the binoculars, the driver saw the bullet connect squarely with the creature's torso. The impact rippled through its massive frame, skin and muscle trembling like gelatin on impact. He describes it as pretty cool to watch, though his voice betrays a hint of disquiet as he recalls the memory.
Because I figured I didn't want to mess up the skull, but didn't want to blow apart the body. I don't know. It seemed logical at the time. So I decide I'm shooting it. I start squeezing. And it gets pretty close. It gets like really close, and I'm like, oh shit, this is weird. This is weird, this isn't right.
From the vantage of a hunter, the shot was near perfect. From the vantage of a bystander, it was chilling to witness such a powerful form stagger under the blow. But the creature didn't simply collapse. Instead, it stumbled a few steps, dropping to all fours in a way that looked both awkward and terrifying. The driver lowered his binoculars, marveling that it could move so swiftly despite its clumsy posture. In his words, it ran on 4 limbs the way a human might, except it was still impossibly fast. Then, it toppled into the brush and vanished momentarily from sight. Justin, Adrenaline surging, racked another round. His heart pounded. This was the moment to finish it off, the same reflex any hunter has when tracking wounded prey. Peering down the scope, Justin found its hindquarters disappearing beyond a small rise. He lined up a shot straight for the spine, the kind of second hit that leaves no doubt. His finger was slowly squeezing the trigger when the driver's urgent voice sliced through the tension. "No, wait!" This time, Justin actually paused. A reason for the sudden shout became clear. Two smaller shapes materialized from the edges of the meadow. The driver turned in disbelief. They had been so focused on the adult creature and the chaos of the initial shot that they hadn't noticed something else lurking in the undergrowth. Out from beneath the brush came figures distinctly shorter, perhaps 3 or 4 feet in height. Justin and the driver froze, the weight of the situation crashing upon them. If the wounded adult was bizarre enough, these smaller ones would take this encounter into entirely unexplored territory.
Do you know what happened? Do you think he shot the big one, or do you know he shot a little one, or are you assuming it was a warning shot?
I turn around and I look and I see exactly what he did. I didn't even have to think about it. I saw what he did.
Where the adult had advanced with a measured, upright gait, the two smaller ones seemed frantic, as though searching for their fallen parent. They made faint vocalizations, soft, guttural sounds that the driver likened to a deaf person struggling to speak. Were they calling for help or trying to locate each other in the tall grass? Whatever the purpose, neither man had ever heard anything like it before. Their presence raised the stakes and an unsettling question. What exactly had they just done? For a split second, both men simply watched. Shock and the haunting reality of the situation collided. Then Justin, in that same mixture of practicality and disbelief, proposed a grim solution. Might as well shoot one of these smaller ones too, take it home. His rationale, as harrowing as it sounded, was rooted in the logic that no one would believe them otherwise. The driver understood the cold reasoning, but was not entirely on board. "Why?" he asked, voicing the moral hesitation that so many would later echo. Yet in the midst of confusion, adrenaline, and raw fear, Justin insisted that physical proof might be their only hope of being believed. Neither man felt threatened by the two little creatures. They appeared more curious or fearful than aggressive. Still, the duo weighed their options in a swirl of adrenaline and dread, aware that they were pushing deeper into a surreal moment neither one knew how to handle. Should they try to put one down and collect evidence? Or was it madness to continue, especially if the adult had only been wounded and lurked somewhere close by? In that meadow, under the fading daylight, everything hinged on a choice. And with each passing second, the boundaries between right and wrong, real and impossible, blurred into an unsettling haze of primal instinct and modern conscience.
And then my buddy says, "No, wait!" But he says it in like such a panic that was like, I actually did, whereas before I didn't really listen to him. And I had the kill. I mean, it would have dropped right there. Bet my life on it.
Justin and the driver now faced the unthinkable. Young creatures in their sights and a wounded adult on the run. In the next installment, we'll follow them further into the heart of this moment, exploring the moral conflicts, the hunt for evidence, and the impending decision that would change both men's lives forever. Chapter 3. Crossing a Line. A pale hush fell over the meadow as Justin and the driver realized what they were looking at. Only moments before, they had been discussing the unthinkable prospect of taking another shot, for evidence, for credibility, for reasons that barely felt real. Then, without warning, the second shot rang out, and everything changed. From a distance of roughly 15 yards, the little one suddenly emerged. No more than 3 or 4 feet tall, it moved with a cautious curiosity. At first, neither man could accept what they were seeing. Was it an animal, a deformed bear, or was it something else entirely? They'd barely had time to process the adult's appearance, and now two smaller creatures were drifting through the brush, letting out strange vocal calls that resembled a muffled human speech or the tones of someone who'd never learned to talk. The driver called out, "Don't do it," in a quick plea, but Justin, his mind scrambled by adrenaline, centered his scope on one of the small figures. He later recounted that he aimed for the neck, hoping to leave the skull intact or perhaps to minimize the evidence of the shot. Even in the swirl of confusion, There seemed to be a grim logic behind his action. If I come back with this, they'll have no choice but to believe me. The crack of the rifle shattered the stillness. Immediately, Justin saw the creature roll downhill, ultimately landing at his feet.
Yeah, and it's almost dark. You pull the trigger. You make it happen. You don't miss a shot because you're trying to figure it out.
Crimson blood seeped over his boot as the small body lay there, quivering in its final moments. When he picked it up, gazing into its eyes, Justin felt a sudden rush of realization. This was no typical quarry, no mere trophy. It felt to him more like a child. Standing there on the slope, the driver's heart twisted in alarm. He spun to see Justin holding the limp body, eyes wide with shock. "What did you do?" he asked, voice tense. The friendship between the two men had always survived the rigors of difficult hunts, but this was different. The driver found himself trapped between loyalty and horror. Yes, he and Justin had always had each other's backs, but who could ever have foreseen this? Now, they were in a situation where every second felt like a countdown to disaster. A swirl of moral confusion, fear of the law, and the fear of what they had just unleashed on themselves psychologically. At first, Justin responded with anger. He tossed the small body toward the driver as if to say, "Don't judge me. We're in this together." Then, as if gravity itself had shifted, they both stood there, speechless, staring at the pitiful remains. The small creature's features were uncannily human. Eyes with whites, rudimentary hands and feet, a face that Justin described as childlike. Nothing in their years of hunting had prepared them for this. And with that shocking revelation came the tidal wave of guilt. Whatever the adult was or had been, this was something else entirely. A young life taken in the heat of a moment that neither man fully understood. The driver was terrified of the legal ramifications. He could only imagine the headlines, "Hunters shoot unknown creatures." If it turned out to be a person in a suit, they were in unspeakable trouble. If it was some undiscovered primate species, the consequences would be equally dire, professionally, morally, and legally.
I still enjoy hunting, but what I did was not hunting. That is not something that a hunter does. It was just murder. It was just killing. There was no point to it. I wasn't going to eat that. It is not a game, it is a person.
But Justin's mind raced with yet another layer of torment. He suddenly felt as though he had committed murder. This was no triumphant kill. It was a cold, unsettling moment that stripped away every ounce of exhilaration he normally felt on a hunt. Panic spiraled, and the two men debated their next move. Return the next day? Bury the remains? Has there been any chance to gather conclusive proof without feeling like grave robbers? Ultimately, they chose to leave the bodies behind, whether out of fear, shock, or some form of moral recoil that overcame their initial compulsion to gather evidence. A fierce storm soon rolled through the area, drenching the region with rain and complicating any attempt at a return. By the time Justin and the driver managed to get back, the meadow offered only scant remnants, patches of unfamiliar hair, a piece of hide, and a deafening silence under the dripping pines. The large figure was gone, the smaller body nowhere to be found. Only later, as Justin stared into the camera during his interviews, did he convey the profound remorse that haunted him. "It felt too human," he admitted, voice trembling. "That wasn't hunting, it was just killing." Again and again, he replayed the moment when he held that small body and locked eyes with it. In those final seconds, it was as if he recognized something innately person-like, something that could not just be classified as game or a curious forest beast. For Justin, that distinction weighed heavily, a guilt that would shape every retelling of the story that followed.
At the very end, she said, "Do you want to know if you passed or failed?" And there's like kind of the pause, because you're nervous taking one of these tests where somebody can say definitively that you lied or that you're telling the truth, even though I felt like I was telling the truth.
From the eerie echoes in the underbrush to the devastating weight of his actions, Justin's life would never be the same. In the next chapter, we'll explore the aftermath of this moment, the controversy that erupted, the hunt for tangible evidence, and the moral and legal shadows that loomed over both men. Chapter 4: The Aftermath and the Search for Answers. Fear can strike even the most seasoned of hunters. As Justin Smeja would discover, that fear amplifies tenfold when you believe you've killed something that defies explanation. something that might be not only unknown to science, but uncomfortably close to human. In the days following his alleged shooting of 2 mysterious creatures, Justin found himself haunted by guilt and overshadowed by the threat of legal repercussions. He felt like a criminal on the run, afraid that the local game warden, the only real law enforcement in the remote Sierra wilderness, could roll up at any moment. Except this time, he wasn't just worried about a mundane citation. He felt like a murderer. Despite these anxieties, the story refused to die. If anything, it snowballed. Disbelievers accused Justin of hoaxing, but others, especially those fascinated by Bigfoot lore, wanted to know more. Before long, filmmaker and interviewer Ro Sahebi crossed paths with Bart Coutinho, a Sasquatch researcher from Monterey, California. Bart, with a background in criminology, had already spent a year examining Justin's claims. Driven by curiosity, Bart even resorted to clandestine methods, eavesdropping on a private conversation between Justin and the driver. Hiding beneath a deck in Monterey, Bart listened intently, expecting to catch them in a lie. Instead, he heard 2 men discussing the event in the same detail and emotion he'd witnessed in their public accounts.
I'd listened to these guys and I really believed that, I was going to hear these guys say, something to the effect of, I think he's buying it or.
That moment for Bart was a powerful indication that they believed their own story. Meanwhile, Justin's desire to clear his name, or at least prove he wasn't making it all up, led to an idea: a polygraph test. Skeptics would have their opinions, but few things can shift public perception more quickly than a successful lie detector examination. So, in Sacramento, a professional polygraph examiner met Justin. On camera, the examiner explained she used a state-of-the-art instrument, the same brand trusted by U.S. military and federal agencies. If Justin was lying, she'd likely catch it. Her questions zeroed in on key points. Did Justin fire at 2 animals, 1 adult and 1 juvenile, that most would call a Bigfoot? Did he believe, when looking down the scope, that he was seeing something impossible, an animal not supposed to exist? Justin answered yes to each. By the end of the session, the examiner confidently declared he was telling the truth, at least according to the data her machine recorded. A wave of relief passed over Justin. If not a definitive scientific proof, it was at least a testament to his sincerity. He had no obvious reason to hoax, no financial gain in sight.
And I tested him on questioning him to the truth of the matter, and he completely passed every question and is telling the truth about shooting a bipedal primate.
Polygraph or not, his story stood on the brink of a much larger mystery. Still, a nagging question remained. Where was the evidence? Justin had once claimed to possess scraps of hide and tissue, possibly from the creature he shot, which he'd recovered after returning to the site. Multiple DNA labs initially showed enthusiasm when they first laid eyes on the sample. It looked unusual, neither purely like a bear nor like any typical piece of hunted game. Yet once the test came back, 3 out of the 4 labs concluded that it was indeed bear hide. The last lab offered no definitive contradiction, leaving Justin back at square one. Then there were his boots, which supposedly bore dried blood from the incident. Many wondered if modern science could extract viable DNA from the old stains. Unfortunately, due to contamination and the passage of time, no usable DNA could be identified. Each dead end frayed Justin's nerves further. He was becoming an object of public scrutiny, and a few more sensational media appearances only made matters worse. One high-profile TV show cast him in an unflattering light, twisting his words for the sake of drama. He found himself portrayed as a reckless man claiming to have a piece of a juvenile Bigfoot, when he says he never made such a statement. The damage was done. The show's storyline overshadowed any nuance of his real experiences. Despite these setbacks, Justin continued returning to the Sierra kill site in the company of Bart Coutinho and other researchers, each time hoping to capture more conclusive evidence. Their gear included thermal imagers, audio recorders, and potent Sasquatch bait, a vile concoction of deer liver and rabbit left to ferment in the sun. The stench alone seemed capable of drawing any predator for miles. And indeed, strange vocalizations, knocks, and glimpses on thermal imaging began to pile up. A series of eerie encounters that teased the possibility of Bigfoot activity. Shadows moved in the tree line, tracks appeared in the soil, and bizarre calls pierced the silence of the night. While each outing provided fresh hints, there was still no slam-dunk piece of physical proof. All of this took a toll on Justin. He'd come for a simple recreation of the shooting with Rose's camera rolling, only to be plunged into a deep sadness when strange things really did occur. "I wish that never happened," he muttered, after a particularly haunting night, lamenting that every new anomaly only fueled further disbelief. Even among those open to his story, the question loomed: would anyone believe him without a body or undeniable DNA? For Justin, the cost of his claim had become painfully clear. The line between monster and man had been blurred in one tragic instant, and there was no easy path to redemption. As the dust settles on this extraordinary tale, one truth stands out. Everyone who hears Justin's story must decide for themselves. Whether you believe he fired upon a long elusive creature or see only a tragic misunderstanding, the moral and scientific questions remain unanswered. For Justin, the weight of that day in the Sierras will forever loom over him, urging us to consider what truly lurks in the depths of our world and in the fragile corners of our own conscience.